Earlier this week, I was meeting with a colleague who I used to work with when I worked at Beit Teshuvah. It's nice to keep in touch and to be in the area, make it easy. And I was asking him, at Beit Teshuvah, are you all doing anything for Juneteenth? And he said, no, actually, we're doing a Pride Shabbat this week. And so this conversation is a little bit ridiculous, even comical from my perspective, because it's a pretty typical conversation actually among colleagues who are not Orthodox, who serve communities where things like Beetle Shabbat are not considered blasphemous, instead they're considered fun. And in our communities, even though obviously we're Jewish communities, we do think and we do talk about people and issues that are not specifically Jewish. Now this one can be a little bit controversial. Different non-Orthodox Jewish communities address these issues in very different ways. And so I want to talk this morning about Juneteenth, acknowledging that this is a topic that can be a little bit uncomfortable. And so what's the deal with Juneteenth anyway? I knew that I grew up mostly in California, hearing the word, knowing it was a holiday, but not knowing and not being taught what it meant. And this all changed for me in a pretty substantial way in 2020. And obviously this was the year that the pandemic started, and right away our society began to function differently. And at the time the pandemic started, I was living down the street from here, near Wilshire and Robertson in Beverly Hills. And as some of us might remember, on May 30th, 2020, things got pretty crazy in the neighborhood. As NBC Los Angeles reported at the time, thousands of protesters marched through the streets to call attention to the devastating circumstances surrounding the death of Minneapolis resident George Floyd. There were many incidents of vandalism. Stores, buildings, and public art pieces were damaged. The message of the peaceful protesters was impacted by criminal behavior. Now, as someone just living there, it was a very scary time. In addition to all the scariness of the pandemic, the next day, the May 30th was a Sunday, I needed to go to the store, and I drove there and the store was boarded up. I couldn't go in and buy what I needed. This definitely impacted my everyday life in a very, very noticeable way. It took all of this to get my attention, but it did get my attention. And so there's a question that as Jews, we do have to ask ourselves, it's asked of us by our tradition, as Jews, should we even pay attention to non-Jewish issues? Now, I've got to acknowledge my personal bias. First of all, I'm not Orthodox. And second of all, I have an interfaith family. I deal with non-Jews all the time, and I love them very dearly. Our tradition does teach in various places in the Talmud and various places throughout our tradition. Yes, we should pay attention to non-Jewish issues, and here's the reason why. Well, it's kind of phrased similar reason, two different phrasings. Mipnei darchei shalom, mipnei tikkun ha'olam. The translation of these phrases, because of the ways of peace and because of the repair of the world. So this is where the phrase tikkun olam comes from. It comes from the Talmud. Now, in a way that can sometimes be controversial, this term tikkun olam, which originates in the Talmud, gets connected from its Talmudic roots and its meaning and context. Just a couple days ago, I was speaking to one of the parents in our religious school. This is a parent whose family decided to join our community because they belonged to another synagogue and it wasn't quite working for their family, and I'm delighted that our community is working out very well for them. And they spoke about this different religious school their children used to attend, and they explained they prefer our school because we're stronger on Hebrew and prayers and Jewish tradition. The school they had left had a stronger focus on social justice, on tikkun olam, but the family didn't really experience the Jewish connection or Jewish relationship to how the religious school taught about these social justice issues. And this is essentially the challenge with this concept in the phrase of tikkun olam. It's a very clear articulation of it. The ways of peace and the repair of the world, as the Talmud explains it, these concepts actually do not align for or against any of our modern American political parties. Tikkun olam, as envisioned by the rabbis of the Talmud, is not a political platform. It's about doing the right thing, and it's about respecting people who are different from us, because when we do this, we minimize conflict, and we can focus on the business of being human, which can be pretty challenging sometimes, and we can focus on the business of being Jewish. Tikkun olam, as articulated by the rabbis of the Talmud, is not a political platform. It's not about doing the right thing as an end in itself. It's about doing the right thing so we can live in a world where there's space for us to be Jewish alongside our non-Jewish neighbors. The point of Tikkun Olam is both to do the right thing and to do the mitzvot. We want to make sure we do both. So why is it that Jewish organizations like the Forward and the United Synagogue for Conservative Judaism are drawing attention to Juneteenth, especially when this year, on Juneteenth, I suppose this is Juneteenth weekend, there is a lot going on besides Juneteenth that is obviously drawing our attention as Jews. The conflict with Iran continues to unfold. I know some of us are probably looking at our notifications during services, even though we sometimes choose to leave our phones outside the sanctuary, but these issues really draw us in. Of course, the relationship between the United States and Israel continues to be something I know all of us are mindful about and concerned about and preoccupied about. So why take any time at all to talk about Juneteenth? Well, we continue to follow the news, cast our votes, call and email our legislators, be mindful of anti-Semitism. We continue to do all of that. And while we're doing that, at the very same time, the people for whom Juneteenth has been a holiday for generations are part of our community here in Los Angeles where we live. They're our neighbors. And the people for whom Juneteenth has been a holiday for generations are part of our Jewish community here in the United States. This is actually an issue relevant to our community. Lest you think that the black people in the Jewish community are all converts, this is not true. There are many black people in the Jewish community who were born Jewish. I'm thinking, and I was thinking when I was preparing this, of someone who I met a number of years ago named Adam. His father was black, his mother Ashkenazi Jewish. He was talking about in high school how he would dye his hair like Dennis Rodman, the NBA player. He had a lot of prejudice to navigate being both black and Jewish. It was really not easy for him. Now, there are also black people who join the Jewish community through conversion, and we embrace everyone who comes authentically to join the Jewish people, no matter what they look like or what their parents' culture is. And so let's talk a little bit more about Juneteenth. So Tema Smith explains in her 2019 column in the foreword, the story of Juneteenth itself can be read as a metaphor for the fact that it is not yet marked on a national level. So that column was written in 2019. Fast forwarding 2 years later, it did become a federal holiday in 2021 with unanimous support from the Senate and a 415 to 14 majority in the House. So back to the column. Despite the Emancipation Proclamation having taken effect over 2 years prior, January 1st, 1863, the slaves of Texas toiled until Major General Gordon Granger issued an order freeing them in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865, hence the holiday. Texas was the last stronghold of chattel slavery in the former Confederacy. But slavery in Texas did not end on the day the order was issued. Freedom was hard won. As historian Henry Louis Gates explains, on plantations, masters had to decide when and how to announce the news, or just wait for a government agent to arrive, and it was not uncommon for them to delay announcing the news until after the harvest was completed. It wouldn't be until later that same year, 1865, on December 6, 1865, that slavery would officially end in the United States with the passing of the 13th Amendment, which set free the last people still enslaved by slave owners clinging onto the last vestiges of chattel slavery. Juneteenth, more than anything, Tema Smith writes, commemorates the potential of freedom. She continues, for the next 100 years, Juneteenth was hardly known outside of Texas, except where black communities migrated, taking the tradition with them. First, it went westward. However, it wouldn't be until the months after the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that the celebration of Juneteenth would spread widely across Black America. To this day, though, Juneteenth has remained primarily a celebration in Black communities, and Tema Smith concludes we are long overdue to take steps toward making Juneteenth part of American culture. So Tema Smith is teaching us we should make Juneteenth part of our culture, just like Martin Luther King Jr. Day is part of our culture. Now, how do we do this? I think this is the most complicated part, the most confusing and difficult part. But here are a few concrete suggestions. First, learn about Juneteenth and why it's important. Read articles and books, watch videos and movies. Second, attend Juneteenth activities, parades, and celebrations. I know that many are advertised in our community, and Juneteenth was technically yesterday, but activities will conclude throughout the weekend. Of course, when we show up, be respectful, be of support, be open to watching, listening, learning, and contributing to the celebration. And third, take action. This could be speaking to your friends and family about Juneteenth, advocating for a Juneteenth observance in your workplace, writing your legislators, supporting Black-owned businesses, or giving tzedakah, mindful of the halachic instruction that we do give to Jewish causes before non-Jewish causes, and to local groups rather than groups far away, with, of course, the exception of Israel. The conservative movement has actually published a Juneteenth Haggadah. It's a very Jewish way to take action through learning and teaching, along with eating and drinking. I learned this year from Rabbi Heather Miller, author of this Haggadah, that an important Juneteenth tradition is to drink some sort of beverage that is red in color. It symbolizes the bloodshed of slaves on their journey to freedom and the perseverance of their descendants. This could be hibiscus tea, strawberry soda, or even grape juice. As long as it's the color red, it's appropriate to fulfill the tradition. And I read a little bit more about Rabbi Miller. It turns out there's another rabbi here in Los Angeles who I've actually met who has the same name. This is a different Rabbi, Heather Miller, and she's based in New York, the author of the Juneteenth Haggadah. As I read her biography, I learned that, in her words, her most cherished role is being the mother of 3 amazing boys who were descended both from formerly enslaved people and Holocaust survivors. Our Jewish community, both American and worldwide, is so amazingly and powerfully diverse. Juneteenth is part of our American Jewish story, and Juneteenth is part of the story of our neighbors and of our nation. Now, this week's parasha is Korach. In our parasha, we find the description, or the source rather, of the ceremony of Pidyon HaBen, redemption of the firstborn child. We still practice this ceremony today. I know some of us in this community have attended the Pidyon HaBen for children of their friends. Some of us have experienced this ceremony for the redemption of our own children and experienced this in our own families. It's a powerful experience, acknowledging the deep connection between God and our children. While we, of course, feel responsible for every aspect of our children's lives, God also helped bring our children into the world, and God accordingly has a type of ownership. The Pidyon HaBen ceremony redeems the child from the service of God and restores the child fully to his family. And this ritual is connected to God redeeming us from slavery in Egypt. God spared our firstborn children from the 10th plague, and accordingly God says to us, "Dedicate to me every firstborn. The first issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine." Redemption from slavery is an essential part of the Jewish story for our people and for each of our families. God's redeeming us from slavery in Egypt, of course, is very different from the end of chattel slavery in America. Yet, we can feel that connection powerfully as we connect with this concept of redemption. So this year and this Shabbat, let's learn from the teachings of Tema Smith and continue to work for the potential of freedom. We know that the story of Juneteenth is the story of many of our neighbors, and it's also the story of our American Jewish brothers and sisters, some Jewish by birth and some Jewish by conversion. May we stay grounded in our mitzvot, both ritual and ethical, as we work to repair God's world, and may we always be proudly Jewish as we follow the path of peace. Shabbat Shalom.